Hello. Welcome to the Keeping It Real Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Fandom in Fiction for Young Readers panel at Afro Comic Con Virtual 2020 event. And thank you for joining us. I want to say, please consider donating to the AFCC Moonshot Junior program that funds young girls of color to go through a 12-month program where they will learn tech skills, innovation, product development, and entrepreneurship. Please click the donation link. Any amount will help. More information will be on the website. Yes. So it is so exciting to be here today. My name is Aya de Leon, and I am a Bay Area writer who has been involved with Afro Comic Con for a few years. Wait, I'm wearing my Afro Comic Con shirt. What? So yes, and when Afro Comic Con asked me to be part of the virtual conference this year, I was like, it's a lot going on, people. But I was just like, oh, this is my chance to be in conversation with a writer whom I love. So first of all, I love his writing. But second of all, I also love him. That's my cousin, Torrey Maldonado from New York. Yes. Hey. And, one of the things that's been happening in the virtual spaces that are now what we've got in this pandemic is, writers in conversation, and it's been really sweet to see these different writers in conversation, particularly writers who write for young people. And I was like, I want to be in conversation with Torrey and putting our works in conversation. So let me share my screen. Here we go. Let me share my screen, and I want to show you, first of all, welcome Torrey Maldonado from Brooklyn. Hey. And, you have really done an incredible job. Folks have really been appreciating your books for some years now in terms of the way that you're writing about young men of color in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about your body of work, starting with your first book?
Yes. First, I would love to just echo some of the things that you said. I'm super excited to be here with you. Some people in our writing world know that we're cousins. So, I feel like singing that song. It's a family affair.
Yes.
What's happening with us right now. I'm also, even if we weren't family, I am a super fan of you. As a person, as a writer, and all the other great things that you are doing to color and uplift our world. So thank you so much for sharing space with me.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's a mutual admiration society. And I'm really excited you have your third book out. And can you just talk us through a little bit of, what the books are and what it was you were trying to do with each one?
Oh, definitely. I've been teaching in my hometown where I was born and raised of Brooklyn, New York for over 20 years. So, and one of the things that it amplified in me was a desire to create books that have been missing intergenerationally on shelves. They weren't there for our grandparents and great grandparents and our parents and our aunts and uncles. They weren't there for our cousins. They weren't there for us. And I was like, what is missing? And I think one of the reasons why the world has really responded and said that my books stand out is because I include communities and people who have been left out.
That's right.
My first book, you know this about me, hip hop and comics shape my storytelling, because that's part of our background and in our DNA. So I just want to pair really quickly my books with 3 hip hop songs. Now, it's not a famous person. And then these are not famous hip hop songs. Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? So Lin-Manuel Miranda, there are 3 songs that really relate to each of my books. The first book that I wrote, Jacqueline Woodson, Well, let me rewind. I want to go to hip hop. Let's start with hip hop. You
Okay.
know, there's a song called "Wrote My Way Out" on the Hamilton
Mm.
mixtape and also the musical. And that's my first book. My first book is about two characters, two boys growing up in Brooklyn who they pen their unspoken thoughts and feelings
Mhm.
into freestyle rap, and they keep it
Mhm.
in these secret composition notebooks. And there's a secret
Mhm.
that happens in the story that unravels one of the boys, and it becomes a tale of friendship. How far will you go to get your friend back on track? And like
Mhm.
50% of the book is written in hip hop verse. My
Mhm.
bars aren't as hot as your bars though. Yeah,
My bars are
I gotta tip
rusty.
the crown to the real person who's wearing the crown. So that's my first book, Secret Saturdays. My second book, Jacqueline Woodson, she's the author of Brown Girl Dreaming. She loved and she blurbed tight. In it, the protagonist is in tight situations, and he's a comic book loving fan. He's a fiend for comics. You know, even
Yeah,
on
you
the cover, you
kind of
see
see
him.
the little Batman, right? And
Yeah,
he's carrying the comic. I love it.
I love it. We read each other's minds. That's exactly what I was gonna say. So he he takes his shot at becoming his own type of person, his own type of everyday superhero. So that pairs nicely with my shot, the song. My third book, What Lane, is I have to give props to an Asian girl out in Ohio. She's in K to 5. She has a librarian. A librarian said that they were reading What Lane, and the girl says this book, What Lane, really is about what's going on right now with the pandemic,
Mhm.
how the world's been turned upside down. And as it's been turned upside down, fingers have been pointing to Asian people. And she said my
Mm.
dad was going to the supermarket and he was he was targeted, and people were harassing him saying that Asian people started the pandemic and they started COVID-19. So the librarian said this book has helped her take a situation that's been turned upside down and make her feel right side up. It's been giving
Mm.
her social navigation skills. So all my books, one last thing I want to say about it is all my books are the types of books that I needed when I was a kid, and I didn't need thick books. So my first book, Secret Saturdays, was 195 pages. I had to chop that down. So Tight became 175 pages. And then I came out with What Lane, and a fan of Tight said, yo, you should have named it Tighter because the book is 125 pages. So all my books are slim, fun books, but they're thick with complexity and thick
Yes,
with what teens and tweens are into.
that's right. Right on. Thank you so much. Yeah, I am a super fan, and anyone who follows my Twitter knows that I was recently in a road trip with like 3 11-year-olds listening to What Lane in
Yeah.
audio, and everybody was loving it. So I'm going to say a little bit about my work. I'm best known for my adult books. And this is the Justice Hustlers series. These are feminist heist books out of Kensington and Kensington Books, which is an indie publisher. And they are crime fiction, they're heist, but they're also urban fiction, as you can see from the very urban covers. And they have romances in them as well. So they qualify in all three of those genres. Definitely not sci-fi fantasy. But then this summer, I self-published a children's chapter book called Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, and I both wrote and illustrated it because it was a pandemic and I was in the house needing to do things. And I thought about pursuing a traditional publisher, but it was very timely in terms of the girl's superpowers and who she's going after with them. So I wanted to self-publish it and be sure to get it out this year. And then this fall, this winter, my first standalone novel comes out, which is called A Spy in the Struggle. And it's about an FBI agent who infiltrates an African-American eco-racial justice organization. So that comes out end of December. And then, both the Justice Hustlers and the adult spy book don't really have any sci-fi fiction elements, but I'm working on this teen spy girl series called Going Dark. And the first book in the series, which is called Undercover Latina, I have to say really was inspired, or the version of it that I'm working on, my agent and I are pretty close to trying to sell it, was very much inspired by Afro Comic Con. And we can stop sharing the screen, that's fine. Because I had been working on this novel. It was, let me see if I can hit the stop sharing button. Well, that will do it. Yes, there we go. I'm learning. I was at Afro Comic Con and really, really just enjoying it. I was there as a fan, was there looking for stuff for my kid, wanted to have a nice date with my nerdy husband. I was like, hey, and didn't think I was there for myself as a writer at all. But I was working on this book, right? And I write realistic fiction. I mean, except for the children's chapter book, but my work for, my YA middle grade and adult books are all set, in this time, in this place, in this reality. And the book just wasn't working. And I was like, what does it need? And I was at Afro Comic Con, and it was like, I was in that world of fandom, where it's like, we know that we're not going to be able to levitate up off the floor, but we're participating in the conversation about those kinds of powers, those kinds of realities, those kind of alternate realities and dimensions. And suddenly, in the story, the girl, she's a spy, right? It's a spy book. And she is befriending this boy who is the son of a suspected terrorist, the estranged son of this suspected terrorist. They think this white nationalist terrorist is planning an attack. They don't know where, they don't know what it is, but there's this son. So they send her into his high school to befriend him. And it's just, the book was like, womp womp. And then I created him as this nerdy fan of this game, kind of like Magic the Gathering, that had a comic book series that went with it. And suddenly the book started working. It had all this story within a story of kind of the game, and it had all this excitement that these young people were about being in the game. When is the next comic book going to come out? The graphic novel, the movie. And the world of fandom really opened up this book that was otherwise set very much in reality. So I feel like that's one of the places where our books are really in conversation, Torrey. And I think it's important because right now we're living in a time where the political issues that are facing us are incredibly urgent. And people, on the one hand, are like, oh, we want to address that. But on the other hand, people kind of want to check out and be like, let me spend some time in some alternate dystopian reality, But I love the way that books can find that balance between being present in the moment in this reality, but also bringing in those magical, fantastical science fiction elements. So can you say a little bit about, particularly in Tight and What Lane, the presence of fandom among these mostly boys, right? These young boys and their relationships and how important those are to them.
Absolutely. The superhero world is really important. I'm going to bring my teacher hat and put my teacher hat on for a second, because over 20 years of teaching has taught me what my life as a student also taught me, is that oftentimes kids will be what they see. And, comic books, and comic book characters, they provide models and that we can grow into. And so on my very first page of What Lane, wasn't playing. I said, we're going to give young people a superhero who I think is an excellent model. And this is how it starts. First page of What Lane. This movie is lit. Dan aims his TV remote to start Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And then it goes on to talk about Miles Morales. And these kids, the fandom, I have to tell you, Biggie has that line, been around the world, and I. I've been around the world doing virtual visits, and so many times kids just, oh my God, why did you put Miles Morales in there? I love Miles Morales. And are you going to write more books with more black and brown superheroes? And the response is something that we shouldn't take lightly. Young people are starving for superheroic images that reflect them. So
That's
I take,
right.
so it's in what lane, it's in tight, from the first page almost to the last pages.
Well, the other thing that I love about your work, I mean, the book that really, so, for me as someone who writes romance, the thing that I say to people when I talk about tight, it's like a middle school toxic bromance, it's like, it's about this relationship between these two boys and the complexity of it, around being excited about having a new friend, but having a new friend who's like, is he shady? Is he just opening up your world? I mean, you intentionally or unintentionally are working with those conventions, right? And it's so effective. And, because I feel like you're writing to kind of middle grade and young adult audiences of boys who are thinking about manhood, right?
Yes.
And their conceptions of manhood are forming. And can you just say more also just specifically about gender and masculinity and toxic masculinity? Because you're clearly working with these superhero archetypes as a way to interrogate that using the language of masculinity that these boys really understand and are invested in.
Yes. It's funny because when I write, I write because I have stories that I need to share, and I'm inspired by young people around me. So I say, this is something that's timely. This is something that's needed. And then the critics and the reviewers, they apply certain terms. Like, for example, when I wrote tight, I just wanted it to be tight. I wanted it to be lit. I wanted it to be engaging. And then that was my message in a bottle that I threw out to the ocean. But what came back was reviewers saying, this book tight, it quietly interrogates toxic masculinity.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, all right, cool. So it's doing that too. I just was trying to let my kids, see something different. And it's really important that we do understand that people say write your world, right? And I believe that we should write the rainbow. We should write every part of our human family into our books. Yes, that's true. But when we say write the rainbow, I think of a spectrum, and I think of a spectrum of personalities. When we talk about black male superheroes, traditionally it's been binary. You've either had, the angry black male archetype, or you've had Sidney Poitier. And we see that inside the recent Black Panther movie. You had Sidney Poitier, who could be Chadwick Boseman, right? T'Challa. And then you had, the angry black male, Killmonger. And I'm like, okay, but does that reflect the spectrum?
That's
I
right.
want to show boys who aren't Killmonger. I want to show boys who aren't Sidney Poitier. I want to show boys who really exist in the range. And that's one of the reasons why I like Miles Morales so much, because Miles Morales, he's tender at times, he's angry at times. His emotional range is just that. It's a range. So yeah, and he says it. There's a scene inside What Lane where the class is discussing the shootings of Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, and it goes on, and they're having this conversation. And at the end, Stefan, the way he feels, he says, he's like, I wish that right now I could either be Miles Morales and just like zap into another multiverse where black boys aren't shot dead just because of the color of our skin. And then he says in the next breath, or I wish that if I had to be here, I could be like Luke Cage and bulletproof. So, I think that superheroes and the black superheroes and brown superheroes that we have, they're really great raw material for us to discuss issues like toxic masculinity and racial profiling and a lot of the things that we are hearing through Black Lives Matter demonstrations.
And I want to say that was one of the things that was really powerful about that, about What Lane, and so timely, right? Like BLM was all in the mix, and it's very much about this young Black man coming, getting older. And what I love about that balance is, on the one hand, he realizes that he's now potentially vulnerable to being targeted in a way that he wasn't when he was a little boy,
Hmm.
but he's coming of age at a time when there's a movement that's addressing it, right? And that
Yes.
movement is very hopeful, and I believe that the movement is incredibly hopeful in terms of, calls to defund police and, bigger goals and visions that really could move the needle significantly around police violence.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that, one of the ways that I feel like our books are so in conversation is like we're really looking at gender. Like you write about boys, I write about girls, and for me, it's been really interesting. All of my work is taking on issues of race and gender. Like it's always in there. Sometimes one is more front and center than the other, but that's always my wheelhouse. And one of the things for Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, the the chapter book that I wrote, I was really like, for me, I get excited as a mom, and we can talk a little bit, about you as a dad as well. As a mom, my daughter, I'll be reading a lot of books. Like I never would have written a chapter book if I didn't have a kid who was like 7 to 10 years old, and we're reading all these chapter books. And you know, I wanted to write something for that age group. And I also particularly, there were all these ones for boys that were hilarious. Captain Underpants, Super Diaper Baby. They were so funny. And I didn't see any about girls, and certainly not targeting, not for girls of color, that were so funny. And I was like, I really want to write something funny, but then like, what's the joke going to be about? Right. Because in Captain Underpants and stuff, it's potty humor, and it's funny potty humor. Like I've laughed out loud at some of that stuff, but I wanted something for girls, and I wanted the butt of the joke to be sexism. So I was trying to figure out like what to do. So in that story, what happens is there's an accident with a laser and a wad of grape gum, and she's angry at the time, so she develops this ability to shoot laser rays out of her eyes when she's angry about sexism. And when those rays hit boys or men who are sexist, they begin to act out their stereotypes about women and girls. So it's really silly, and it's funny, and it's fun, but it also is a tool to teach, to talk with girls of that age group, and all kids, but particularly girls, about sexism. And so part of what happens with the president is he comes to town to judge a tween beauty contest, right? And so then we get to talk about beauty contests and what they are, leveled for that, kind of 7 to 10 year old age. And I think these these kinds of books are a great way to break down some of these different concepts. Like one of the things going on in my work in progress, Undercover Latina, it's a story about this Latina spy girl, and she's the one who's sent. It's her first assignment. She's kind of young, but she's the one who's sent because her mom is Puerto Rican, her dad is Mexican, but she's really light skinned. She has super curly hair, but if she presses her hair, she's able to pass for white. So it's a book that's talking about color and what does it mean to be a person of color who is mistaken for white. And clearly, we in the United States have a history of people passing. And so people who are mistaken for white can sometimes take that as an opportunity to kind of disavow their community and move up in their socioeconomic status. But it can also be an opportunity for stealth, right? And so she takes it as an opportunity for stealth. And it's interesting. She then gets to kind of witness these white spaces and be interacted with in these different ways. But it also, ends up being a sort of an allegory for all of us who feel disconnected from our community in some kind of way and are longing to be seen and connected. So, those are just some of the things that I've been chewing on in these books for young people.
Yeah. When you talk about, writing for girls and writing girl characters, representation 1000% matters. And it really gets exemplified in something that happened with me. We were talking about, we're parents, right? And we're parents of girls. I have one child, I have a daughter, she almost was called Aya, but we called her Ava, right? And Ava and I, we went to see that Ant-Man movie, the second one. And in the second one, they have a Black female superhero, right? She's actually made, some people debate, maybe she's an anti-hero, right? Ava Starr, the Ghost. She has the ability to phase through objects. And, you were talking about connection. I thought I was just watching the movie with Ava, and we were just having this great time. We come out of the movie theater. I'm getting my phone right now so I can show you.
Uh-huh.
She puts her hood on. This is her.
Oh.
And she puts her hood on. And my daughter doesn't wear a hood. So I'm trying to figure out. I'm like, why is she wearing this hood? We get outside, and I said, Ava, that was cool that you put your hood on afterwards. Why'd you do that? And she said, because the character, the Ghost, she wore a hood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, my daughter she really doesn't connect to comics. But yet seeing a reflection of her on the big screen as a superhero had resonated so powerful that even in seconds, she was emulating her.
That's right. Well, and that's why it's so important that we're actually thinking consciously about what are the messages that we want to embed in this work, because, those of us who are parents, for you as a teacher, we see the young people right away.
Yes.
If, something in media, they want to emulate it. They want to feel connected to that bigger vision. And that's really, that's powerful.
Can I ask you a question? So there's something that I had to say. I want to circle back to something you said. You had mentioned, when we write, we come to write as creators, right? And will we abandon aspects of our community, or will we, center aspects of our community? And that's one of the reasons why I love Uncle Aaron in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And also his story has other dimensions and other facets in the comic. But a through line between the comic and also the movie is that Uncle Aaron is real. Like I had guys who weren't blood related to me who were uncles in the community. And I talk about this in Tight, dudes who, they were good guys, but the way society unequally treats Black men puts us in certain lanes, right?
That's right.
And we don't get all the opportunities that some other men are given.
Right.
So we have to develop side hustles. Yep. And if you notice, Uncle Aaron in the movie, he was doing villainous stuff to make money, to support his lifestyle. And that really, I was like, oh my God, see, this is real. Like that fact that like Black men don't have opportunities is written into this, and this is important. And I think that's important. It's like, if we're going to write reality, we got to write all of the reality. And that realism, it's a texture that makes the story even more powerful.
Well, one of the things that I love about your work is it's really, not only do you have this crew of different boys of color, who have, slightly different backgrounds. Some are, have two Black parents, some have, a Black parent, a Latinx parent, some have like, and in What Lane, he has a Black dad and a white mom, and the dads are really different. We have these dads who, some are really struggling, some, are dealing with the criminal legal system. And some are, more sort of straight up middle class. It's really, I love what you're doing there with range. But the other thing that I really love, that I feel like you're doing, one of the things that's interesting about us as cousins, right? We're related on the Black side, but we're both Black and Puerto Rican.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting in your work is that you have figured out how to have these multiracial characters. And that's something that I have not quite figured out. Like, my characters are all siloed, right?
Right.
I have a Black character, then I have a Latino character, then I have another Black one, then another, like literally I've been going back and forth in the books. And I have yet to really, I've got some books in the works that look at that more. And I think, Undercover Latina, because she's both Mexican and Puerto Rican, she's Latinx on both sides, but they're very different culturally. So there's a little bit there. But, before we get to questions, can you say anything about what you've figured out there in terms of having these communities of young people? It may be that it really reflects the Brooklyn that you grew up in and continue to live in, right? That there are these really rich communities of color, and they're not siloed at all. Like, everybody's, interacting, sometimes beefing, sometimes getting along, but that's very much the community of young people of color.
Yes. I'll never forget when my editor, the amazing Nancy Paulson, she invited me up to the old Penguin Studios in Lower Manhattan, and I felt like Miles Morales, like I was web swinging high over the buildings because we were way up, and she took my breath away because she picked up the cover of Tight and showed it to me. It's my first time holding it, the actual book in my hand.
Yes.
And she taps the boy and she goes, "That's you, isn't it?" And I was like, people recognize my books as #Own Voices books, right? People say, they like the Washington Post named Tight one of the best books of the year. NPR did too, and they said one of the reasons why is because you can tell the book is inspired by Torrey Maldonado's students, right? There's a writing tip that we both know: you have to write your world.
Yeah.
And my world isn't siloed. It isn't compartmentalized, right? My identity isn't. Your identity isn't. We're Black and Puerto Rican. So when we say Boricua Morena, when we come to the laptop, we're trying to write our world. We're trying to write an integrated experience. I have to say something though. I remember back in the day, I was watching Oprah, right? And Oprah had Iyanla Vanzant on, and me and you, we connected. We vibed about Iyanla before. Iyanla said something, and I was like, "Wow, that's true." She said, "We often teach the things that we need to learn."
Yes.
Right? And I kind of feel like when I write these books, I'm also trying to reconcile certain things within me. My writing is a form of therapy for me. And in a way, it's a little selfish. I'm writing the book that I needed when I was a teen or a tween. And if the readers like it too, cool. But I wrote something that I needed to get out. And I think I nail bite when I write. I'm nervous. And I ask myself, am I getting this right? Because when I wrote Secret Saturdays is about two boys. They're half Black and they're half Puerto Rican. And I was like, am I doing these characters justice? Am I describing them in a way that they're layered and they're complex and they're not two-dimensional? Because we grew up in a world where a lot of the media represents us one-dimensionally. And often that one dimension isn't positive.
That's
right. I was like, I gotta get this right. And I was relieved when people started giving feedback to the book and saying, these characters are fully realized. They're complex, they're layered, they're multidimensional. I was like, oh, because that's what our personal realities are. And that's what Brooklyn is to me. And that's been my classrooms for over 20 years, multidimensional. So I just try to reflect that on the page.
And you do. I mean, I think it's interesting this piece that you're saying about how we write what we need, and sometimes we're writing something into existence for ourselves. It's not surprising. I'm 5 books in. It's going to take me a minute to get there because that's the difference. I think between there are so many differences between Brooklyn and Berkeley, right? But like when I came up, that was not happening. Like East Coast, you know the Caribbean Latinx community is part of the African diaspora. And here on the West Coast, like Mexico is not repping for the African diaspora, although there certainly are some Afro-Mexicanos, right? So, it was much more segmented. So I think those silos still exist in my head, and I'm kind of slowly trying to write my way out of them. And I'm mixing it up a little bit more with each book that I write. But
Yeah.
I want to shift and see if we can jump into some of the questions that we got. So even though
Yes.
this panel has been pre-recorded, we reached out to our community for questions. And Torrey, you want to pull one up?
Oh, totally.
Let's see what I got too.
So I cast a fishing hook, out into many different bodies of intellectual waters. I asked, I got questions from Las Vegas.
Nice.
I got questions from a teacher in Las Vegas. I got questions from students in Missouri. I got questions from a librarian and kids in Texas. So I feel like we have this buffet and we're just looking like, all right, which state are we going to pick from? So I'm going to pick from Missouri right now.
Nice.
This question comes from a girl named Anna. I hope I'm saying that right. If it's not Anna, then it's Anna, Anna. And she's in Missouri. Her question is, how did you choose the African-American superheroes that you used in what lane? How did you choose them? And so that goes back to what you just said, Aya. You said, oftentimes people don't do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we hear that song, Boricua Morena, the celebration of both, and then the integration, the coming together of both, people don't often do that in their writing. And I think one of the reasons why people often don't do that in their writing is because the world often doesn't let us, have both sides. There's a scene that I wrote here in Secret Saturdays, and it says right here, he goes, Puerto Ricans are whack. This black kid tells me in the 4th grade. It's 3:00 on the Monday after the Puerto Rican Day parade, and I'm outside my school with this kid everybody calls Hammerhead. He starts teasing me about Puerto Rican beads that I got at the parade. And it goes on. And the boy says to him, hey, yo, living la vida loca. Hammerhead shouts at me, I heard you half black and you half Puerto Rican. What are you, Puerto Rican today? Tomorrow you black? That, I've read that into different student groups, and the head nodding and the thumbs ups and the vocality, kids telling me, yo, that's real. Even kids who are multiracial or mixed are being told by kids and adults, yo, you got to stay in one lane.
That's
you
right.
choose, you this or you that. So to answer Anna's question, how did I choose the African-American superheroes used in what lane? It was a heart thing. I saw Miles Morales in the movie theater and I started to cry because he was the hero that I was waiting for. He's black and Puerto Rican. He's the mix. So I definitely had to choose Miles Morales, and that's how he got chosen, in the book.
Nice. Well, one of the questions that I have here is from Laura Atkins, who is a writer, publisher, and editor. And she says, how can we help envision possible futures for young readers while connecting to the present? And what book examples can you think of that do that now? And she mentions one book that does that is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, but is really interested in finding more books like that and seeing more sci-fi fantasy authors engaging kids to envision new realities that aren't just dystopian, but don't deny human complexity. So she's sort of looking for the kidlit version of Octavia Butler. Well, I feel like that's one of the opportunities in this space that we've been writing into about, fandom. When we're writing about the world that we actually live in, but also writing about fandom, I think because part of what happens in our own political activism, right? We can't zap things and change them. We can't, fly over to here or there. We don't have these superpowers that, arguably I would like to have right now. I would love to be able to have some superpower that could address climate change or stop voter suppression or, any of those kinds of superpowers. But what we do have is the power of our activism, right? And I think one of the things that's powerful to me about superheroes is that they help give us models when they're written with more interiority of decisions to be brave, right? Tough choices. I feel like all of that is really important in this space of writing about fandom in the real world. What would you add to that?
I like that you talk about the interiority, being talking about like what's inside, because this touches on a conversation that comic book fans and sci-fi and fantasy fans around the world have been having for decades. And the conversation is about escapism,
Right.
versus, the now, this time and this place. Just yesterday I was hanging out with one of my good friends. We were in the backyard and I was telling him, I was like, yo, I'm gonna hang with my cousin tomorrow. We're gonna be, talking about comics. And he's like, yo, you know what I want you to talk about? I have this question. So this question comes from Marco in New York, from the Boogie Down Bronx. He wants to, and the question speaks to the answer too. He's like, Superman is cool. This is what he says. Superman is cool, right? No doubt. But Superman's from a farm. And he's from an all-white world. Mm-hmm. Superman doesn't know racism. Right? And Superman doesn't know drug problems that exist inside our urban communities. That's and also right. Our suburban communities, right? And how that specifically impacts the Black community and brown communities. So he's like, so when you talk about interiority, here's the thing I wrestle with when I brought these Black and brown superheroes into Tight, and when I brought them into What Lane, I had to ask myself, am I encouraging young people to put on a cape and fly away?
Right.
Or am I encouraging kids to say, we're going to stay right here and we're going to use our abilities to improve this here and this now, mm-hmm. And it got deep. It got so deep. The conversation yesterday turned into how we're often promised a better life in the afterlife.
Right.
Right. Versus Bob Marley, if you knew what life is worth, you would try to look for yours on earth.
That's right.
So that raises the question: what type of superheroes do we need our kids to see?
Well, I think that you handle that so well in What Lane, because as much as he and his friends are so moved by these superheroes, the game changer in the story is the movement for Black lives. Yes. Like that's actually the game changer. That's actually the superpower that we see acting powerfully in the book is the movement, and for me, I feel like that's so critical because this question of escapism, a couple of years ago, when I gave the keynote address at Afro Comic Con, my whole thing was about Black people. Black people joining the climate movement. That, we have, like, the climate movement is literally a sci-fi story about people who, like, the clock is ticking and, like, the evil folks have, like, conspired to make this, like, disaster happen, to send us into a dystopia, and we must act together. We can do it. All hope is not lost. Like, that was that was my talk. Like, all right, Black people, we've been studying this story for years. Those of us who, are reading sci-fi fantasy about, the hero's journey. We were reluctant heroes, but we need to get in there. And that, that's actually that's my that's my main, soapbox rant to anyone who will listen these days. And I think, and those really are the heroes. Those really are going to be the heroes. And I believe in this upcoming election, it's, the movement to protect our vote, and the movement to make sure that everybody votes, and the movement to make sure that those votes are counted, and that outcome is enforced. Like, these are the heroes. So I want to go on to another question. This comes from NJ Mvondo, owner of Multiculturalism Rocks, a platform and pop-up that celebrate cultural diversity in children's literature. And she asks, are BIPOC, that's Black and Indigenous people of color, are BIPOC cultural elements an essential part or inspiration for fantasy, sci-fi children's stories? And if yes or no, how do you think that lack or influence impacts the reader's reading experience? And I guess I'll just start by saying, yeah, I mean, I think for so many Black and Indigenous people of color who are writing, it's very much a part of what we're writing about, because whether it's in this world or in a future world, those issues of race and class and gender and culture clash and colonization are always at play. I'm just starting to work on a middle grade novel that has to do with time travel. And it's a Black family, actually a Black and Indigenous family. And really part of what's happening is the girl who's 12 goes back to the 90s, right? And so part of it is she's tracking how race and racism are playing out in these different eras, right? How is race and racism playing out in her era? And how is race and racism playing out basically in her mother's era? And I mean, I think that that's part of what sci-fi and fantasy are doing. I was recently on a panel with an artist who writes about time travel, and she said that she went to talk to physicists to see, like, is time travel possible? Like, is this ever going to happen? And they said, no, time travel is actually a literary device that allows us to look at different issues about time. And I loved that answer. Anyway, so what is your thought, Torrey, in answer to this question about are these cultural elements an essential part or inspiration for fantasy sci-fi children's stories?
It's funny that you read that question from NJ Movando. I gotta say what's up to her, because she's a friend. Hey. So it was so cool that her question popped up years ago. When Secret Saturdays came out, she did an interview with me for Multiculturalism Rocks, and it turned into a Father's Day series.
Oh, wow.
Like, she was so moved by what I had said about the impact of men on my life and how it affected my relationships, that she was just like, this can't just be one blog. So she's then got other writers and other creators to talk about their dad experiences too. So I got to give a shout out to NJ. I feel like the answer is yes to her question. I feel as though comics, sci-fi, fantasy, we're talking about media. And when we're talking about media, we're talking about one of the top 4 influences on young people, which mean it's really one of the top 4 influences on human life, right? If you want to free minds, or you want to trap minds, media is one of the ways you can do it. I'll give you an example. Black Thought, Tariq from The Roots, he raps on the mixtape for Hamilton. On My Shot, he goes, when our role models tell us that we were born to be felons, we're going to end up robbing or stealing or selling. We're not going to go to Harvard or Carnegie Mellon. Take that and apply it to a Spider-Man lunchbox. What's so deep is that he connects it to Spider-Man. He's saying our heroes are telling us that we're going to be felons. Our heroes are telling us in comics that we're going to be felons. And we carry that on our Spider-Man image or that other image on our lunchbox. And what it does is it colonizes your mind. It stigmatizes your mind. And comics have the power, and sci-fi and fantasy, they have the power to destigmatize minds and see, this goes to a question that someone asked. Morgan Jackson in Las Vegas is a teacher, and she said, her question was, why is it important for white kids?
Come on now.
Black and brown superheroes. And the reason is because they can see us being more than what Black Thought said, more than just thugs, more than just felons, that we could be a range of the humanity that others are afforded. When we're talking about decolonizing minds, I have to say this about decolonizing minds. Rest in peace. Right here, Wakanda Forever, Chadwick Boseman. I want to thank Chadwick Boseman for fighting for us. He had the opportunity to either speak in a British accent, and he said the Black Panther has to speak in an African dialect. And the reason is because Wakanda is not colonized.
That's right.
How would we sound like Europeans?
That's right.
Because of that one pebble or boulder that Chadwick Boseman threw into the oceanic conversation, it sent ripples out. And if you notice, the garb, the wardrobes in Black Panther, African, right? So I just have to say that, Chadwick, by doing that, helped decolonize minds, and I welcome more creators to try to find out, like, how can we do this? Because we don't need Black and brown superheroes that are just embracing whiteness. We need Black and brown superheroes that are the myriad of Blackness and the myriad of brownness.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you really nailed it. Oh, first of all, I want to say, always cite my people. The time travel writer is Annalee Newitz. But I want to say that what you're talking about is so critical also when we talk about movements. Oh, I want to say, I'm seeing in the chat, 2020 is such a long year that actually I gave the keynote at Afro Comic Con last year. It feels like years ago because 2020 has been so long. But yeah, that was last year. So the thing that I wanted to say, though, that's so key about the heroism of Black and brown folks in literature and comics and sci-fi and fantasy, not just being for young Black and brown young people to see, but actually for everybody. I think one of the reasons that is so critical at this juncture politically is that what is missing in our world is the leadership of people of color. People thought, like, oh, if we can elect Barack Obama, then that's going to solve everything. No, it's not about one exceptional person being in leadership. It's about the people of color, who are the majority of people on the globe, being able to be in leadership at a global level. So that means, what we're just starting to scratch the surface of a little bit in, say, our Congress, right? Having people in Congress who look more like the people they're supposed to be representing. But also in terms of the climate movement, the climate movement, which is arguably addressing the greatest existential threat that has ever faced humanity. And unfortunately, for so many years, the environmental movement has been white, middle and upper class, coming really out of the West. There actually have always been movements around climate justice coming out of communities of people of color in the United States and coming out of global South nations, but they have been, marginalized, off to the side, not in the center. And so I feel like the leadership the kind of leadership and heroism and protagonism that we're seeing in literature is really a dress rehearsal for the kind of leadership, more equitable leadership that we need to see in the world. Black and brown folks, women, queer and trans folks, poor and working class folks, folks from the global South, because all of what we've had, for the last 500 years or whatever, which has been European, white, male, owning class, cis, heterosexual, able-bodied, has only gotten us into this mess. So I think that it's very, very important. These kinds of stories are very, very important as an antidote to racism, where white young people and adults can practice paying attention to what people of color have to say, pay attention, and practice seeing people of color in the center, because that's the kind of shift that we need to create equity. It doesn't mean that white people need to be oppressed or cast aside. It just means that things need to be evened out in terms of equity.
I have to take a page out of an amazing Black illustrator notebook. His name is Floyd Cooper. Floyd Cooper, he had asked the question. He asked, where are the gatekeepers created?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where are the people in power, the adults in power? Where are they created? And he said, they're created in schools.
That's right.
Right? And people have asked me, like, I recently got a compliment for What Lane, and it blew me away, right? Oprah listed it as a top book to help young people discuss racism. The New York Times listed it as a top book that's anti-racist, right? But the compliment that I got was an email from a librarian. She emailed and she said, I felt like you wrote a Ta-Nehisi Coates-esque book, but for tweens and
That's
teens.
right. That's right.
I was like, oh my God, can I get that as a tattoo or something? Like, and the thing that I have to say is, people talk about George Floyd, right? And I always say this. I think of Tupac, when Tupac said, learn to see me as a brother instead of two distant strangers. What would have happened if the law enforcement agent who murdered George Floyd, what if he saw him as a brother? If he saw him as a brother, there would have been a radically different outcome.
That's right.
And what you said is the literature is a dress rehearsal for how people are going to act out in the world. My question is, I asked this to different student groups. I say, how do we create better cops? How do you do it? You start working on them when they're young people.
Yeah.
Right? Because then when they get to that position, they'll be seeing people as humans. They'll have empathy in their interactions. And so I have to say,
go ahead.
And so I have to say, I'm glad that you're doing your work and I'm doing my work. Mm-hmm. We're working with young people, because if you want a mighty oak tree, if you want a mighty ally, then you have to start with the acorns. If you want better adults, you got to work with the kids.
That's right. And I want to say the inverse of that also is that until we have a society that raises up folks who are anti-racist, we might need to defund the police, because we can't reliably expect that the folks who have been coming up through these school systems, will be able to see people of color as humans. But I need to say we are just about out of time. We've got like a minute and a half. So in 30 seconds, Torrey, can you tell people where to find your books and where to find you if they want to keep up with you?
All right. So my name is Torrey Maldonado. If you put a .com on that, then you can go and you can find all my books. I support indie bookstores as well as other stores, and you can find links right there. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, wherever books are sold, that's where you will find my books. I'm really proud because What Lane has become, the School Library Journal just did a feature on how What Lane is being used across the country as a one school, one book read. All these schools are reading that book. So it's something to help young people and also older people rise up.
Yes. And I am Aya de Leon. Same deal. You can put an @ in front of it and find me on Twitter. You could put an @ on the beginning of it and a rights on the end of it. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Aya de Leon Writes. And ayadeleon.com is also a great place to find links to all of my books. And I just want to thank Afro Comic Con so much for
Yeah.
having us today and for holding it down year after year. We love y'all and enjoy the rest of this fabulous day of panels and activities in the Afro Comic Con universe.